to Talking Supply Chain. In each episode, top supply chain industry professionals and the nation's top thought leaders join host Brian Straight and share their unique insights to help supply chain managers stay one step ahead of their competition. This is Talking Supply Chain. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Talking Supply Chain. I'm your host, Brian Straight. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to dive into one of the biggest challenges facing manufacturers, bridging the disconnect between operational technology, or the systems and people on the shop floor, and information technology, which is the digital backbone that runs enterprise systems. Too often, OT and IT systems teams work in silos, and that disconnect can slow transformations, it can weaken cybersecurity efforts, and it can limit competitiveness. Joining me today is Fares Sakka, Director of Smart Industry for Orange Business in the Americas. Fares has spent his career helping manufacturers modernize operations, bringing OT and IT together, and building strategies that balance resilience, efficiency, and security for organizations. Fares, thanks for being here. Great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I appreciate that.
Great. For our audience, can you give a little background on Orange Business and your role in the organization? I think some people may not be familiar with you guys, so can you introduce yourselves a little bit if you could?
Yeah, definitely I can do that. So I'm part of Orange Business, which is the business-to-business division of the Orange Group, telecommunication leader. Orange Group is about a $45 billion company, and Orange Business is about 20% of that. We are global in nature with a local touch. We have about 30,000 employees, and we operate across 65 countries. We actually do serve 30,000 B2B customers globally in about 200 territories. We describe ourselves as a leading network and digital integrator. And to be honest with you, unlike telecom companies that you may hear about, we have diversified into a lot of things, including cybersecurity, cloud, and digital services. And we want to combine this strength with the right platforms and the trusted partners to provide what we call a secure end-to-end digital infrastructure for our multinational customers around the world. And with that mantra, we focus on customer experience, employee experience, and operational experience. And operational experience is the one that I'm part of, right? And like you said, right, we really focus on helping manufacturing enterprises modernize their factories. That's super important, and that's the topic of the day. But I want to make sure that our listeners, understand that I really do believe that the most successful industrial transformations happens when we bring those peoples together, right? IT and OT connecting the shop floor, connecting the know-how of the OT, as long as there is a common shared vision of the manufacturing of tomorrow, Brian.
Yep. And manufacturing, as everybody and all our listeners realize, is kind of one of the key foundations of the supply chain overall. So it's important that manufacturing is done correctly and smoothly. So you mentioned that connecting the OT, the IT. Why don't we start by kind of setting the conversation on those two terms, right? The operational technology, information technology. What's the difference between those two for those people who maybe don't work in both areas? What's the big difference between OT and IT, and why have they traditionally not worked together well?
Yeah, I think, Brian, you introduced it a little bit already, so which is good. So I'm going to probably repeat a little bit there because I think it's important. IT, it's about the digital business. It's about the computers, it's about the networks, it's about the servers, the applications, the ERP. It's about the software world, right? Operational technology is the shop floor, sorry. They control the physical world. So the machines, the sensors, the industrial control systems, the PLCs, the SCADAs, the things that actually make the product. So in different words, I would say that IT is all about enabling the business to move fast, right? I need to deploy new capabilities quickly, scale services on demand, and protect data. While actually operational technologies, they think in terms of processes. I need the machines to run with no interruption. I need to avoid operators to get themselves into accidents. I need to keep the quality of my products very high. I mean, a good day for OT means nothing changed, everything ran perfectly, right? And so you can see I'm already going towards a different mindset, different cultures, different languages, right? And so that creates a sort of a silo, right? The first reason of the silos that I see, Brian, if you allow me to go a little bit further on
Yeah.
this, is that first of all, historically, they sort of lived in two parallel universes and with absolutely no need for interaction. They were actually completely air gapped by design. The OT systems were sort of intentionally isolated from external networks. The industrial control systems had zero internet connection, no corporate network integration whatsoever, not even emails, right? And that air gap was the gold standard because it kind of eliminated the cyber threats and kind of preventing the failures to spread into the production lines, right? So, when your factory, for example, controls dangerous chemicals or high pressure systems, isolation is not just a smart move; it's actually essential. The number two thing that I see fundamentally, and I was already kind of getting in there, is a different culture. It's different DNA, right? So when you look at the IT culture, take the example of a laptop, right? I mean, your laptop not working is okay. You can just reboot your computer, or IT can do a software update remotely, huh? Or patch it, if you will. Thinking about Wi-Fi, for example, right? No biggie if your Wi-Fi does not work for a few hours at the office, you can just use your phone with cellular connectivity to get on Zoom or Teams, right? But the operational technology culture values stability. They're super risk averse, actually. And any issue could actually shut down the production lines, and that could cost a lot of money. And that could also create some safety incidents for the workers, right? So it's very, very key to really, understand that difference in DNA. And I'd say the last thing that make them very different and justifies really like the reason why they're being siloed is the fact that companies have reinforced that from an organizational structure perspective. Um, IT reports to the CA organization, OT reports to the plant manager. So they have different budgets, different KPIs, different priorities, two different kingdoms, right? And the irony of that, Brian, I'd say is that separation really made perfect sense for decades. Really, it was good engineering and risk management best practice. But those decades of justification, justified separation, should I say, have created kind of like those silos, and that are very difficult to overcome today. And that's what, at least from my perspective, makes bridging the IT/OT divide challenging.
Yeah. And I mean, the world is very different today, right, than where we were manufacturing wise 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I think that's probably what's driven some of this change, right? And what we expect from organizations from your manufacturing today is so different, and the ability to collect data and to collect information and work together in a cohesive approach, right? To running the business. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In preparing for this, I came across this term called hybrid worlds. It's apparently a phrase that's used quite often. Can you kind of talk about what a hybrid world is in the context of manufacturing? I think that'll help also set this conversation for the rest of the time we have together.
Yeah, hybrid words. You're probably uh, you're probably referring to the IT/OT overlap, and sometimes people actually talk about the word conversions.
Hmm.
I think that's what it means here. I mean, we've kind of like laid out the ground, right? We said those two, entities are working and functioning as two different kingdoms. And I think that's where we're going with this hybrid word appellation or nomination. And it's actually due to the rise of the Industry 4.0, right? The Industry 4.0, which is typically the adoption of new technology to create more automation, more digitalization, more connectivity into the OT manufacturing environment for the past decades, has required manufacturing to bring these two worlds together, right? So they can digitize their operations, so IT and OT. And the problem is that most companies, they are still kind of struggling today with this intersection. A lot of them need those IT capabilities in their OT environment, obviously, but they may not know exactly how to do that without really disrupting the operations or even like compromising, any of the reliability of this or the safety of their workers on their production line. So I think hybrid works is the fact that you're actually bringing those two together, and that's where this is going.
Yep. So we've created a whole new world, right? We're living in now, right? With IT and OT working harmoniously together in one phrase, right? That's where we're heading, and that's where we hopefully will get to at some point. But you mentioned you know talk about barriers a little bit, and talked about the silos and things, and I think there's a couple of things that probably play a role in some of this stuff, and I'd like to get your thoughts on these, and that is one. I mean, the enemy of any businesses of manufacturing business is downtime, right? We don't want downtime in any way, and we talk about technologies and legacy systems, which is true in a lot of business. In fact, I was at a conference this week on with defense logistics people, and they were talking about legacy systems, how they're running some of the defense supply chain technologies on systems that are 30, 40 years old. So businesses across the spectrum deal with legacy systems. So can you kind of talk a little bit about legacy systems and the downtime fears, and how those two things are barriers sometimes to organizations, and why are they difficult to overcome these things, and what we can just put new technology in, and how do leaders address these concerns in order to move their organizations better and get OT and IT closer together?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions there, Brian.
Yeah.
So it probably will take me a minute to respond to that one. So just bear with me
Yeah.
there. I think there's a lot to say. You're spot on. You're spot on in the fact that the legacy systems and the downtime fears are the most common source of conversations when it comes to breeding IT and OT. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? So first and foremost, our listeners, I think, should already know or may want to know that those OT systems are completely hardwired with the plant's physical processes, right? So any change can actually create a sort of a snowball effect into the production line, right? And as you mentioned very well, these systems are, 20, 30, 40 years old. And at the time, they were built with not connectivity in mind,
Yeah.
if I can say this way. And the thing is that these legacy OT systems became sort of the production backbone, but the engineers who built them have retired. So the knowledge exists in people's minds, like in people's heads, in the factory, not really in manuals. And that kind of makes any change feel like, I would say, performing a sort of a spine surgery without being a surgeon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there is a fear of breaking what is working. And that's definitely something that we hear all the time from our customers. And on the top of that, you actually add the financial stakes that are huge, right? I mean, we talked a little bit about, outage. You just mentioned downtime. I mean, think about like a brief outage can just like stop the entire line. So that means millions of dollars. I think there is a number that I've seen last time. It ranges, depending on the vertical, of course, from 5K to 50K dollars a minute. So you just do the math. I mean, a couple of hours, a couple of days, and it could cost a lot of money for people, right? So, and again, so it kind of helps, unfortunately, accelerate this kind of antagonist risk reward equation, if I can say it this way. It's creating a sort of a modernization freezing equation. You know what I mean, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, ultimately, when you talk to OT people, as soon as you say change, they say, wait a minute, production will stop. I may lose money and people may get hurt, right? So you got to understand, I mean, they've built those careers on stability and reliability. Their success is measured by what does not happen. As
Yeah.
simple as that, right? So when you combine all of that, you end up with a sort of a paralysis effect. And it's really due to a justified risk management mindset. When your reputation depends on keeping things running and the knowledge is to fix problems, right? It's walking out the door because people want to have like a well-deserved retirement. Maintaining the status quo, right, feels like the only safe choice. And even though when you want to actually modernize and modernization is actually necessary, should I say, right? So you see, this is very complex, and it's definitely due to the legacy OT system and the fear of downtime.
Yeah.
Now, I think you asked the question, how can leaders address them? there's a couple of things, right? I mean, this is my opinion. There's probably much more, but ultimately, what we recommend our customers is to start small and try to prove as big as you can, right? So you're not going to modernize a 30-year-old production line overnight. It's not going to happen, right? So ideally, you have to start gradually with low risk and high value areas. So we believe that we want to help our customers to prove the concept could work and show some sort of a return on investment, and then bit by bit gradually expand. So because at the end of the day, each small success can build confidence for the next step and actually can build trust between IT and OT. That's one. Another one is we talked about kind of the knowledge that is kind of leaving and walking out the door here. And capturing the knowledge right now is very, very critical, right? Those engineers that had 25 years of OT knowledge are retiring. You have to document everything. You have to do that as long as they're here, right? So use their expertise to identify what would be the safest modernization path, right? And that knowledge is kind of becoming sort of your roadmap for having changes being done confidently. Okay.
Mhm.
There's another aspect that I think people are often really concerned about. When we talk about change, it's like, oh, I can't touch my OT because it's the core foundation of what's happening in my assembly line. Absolutely, 100%. But we need to treat the OT as kind of a layered ecosystem, meaning that you gotta keep the heart safe. Sorry, you have to make sure that it's completely untouched. But that's your kind of your production heartbeat, right? But around the core, then you can add some IT overlays, right? That communicates through, I don't know, secure gateways, virtualizations, and so on. So you're not replacing anything critical, you're adding intelligence around it. That's a very, very, very important thing here. And obviously, right, I mean, you cannot treat IT and OT differently. You have to treat them as partners. You have to make sure that, you know, for IT, OT should not only be a customer, and for OT, IT should not only be a black box, right? So I think the success is about showing that the modernization is enhancing what OT does very well, right? And you gotta build trust for them to accept IT to come in and to support their modernizations effort, right? So that would definitely kind of accelerate bridging IT and OT.
Yep. And you mentioned several things in that answer, and I know I asked you a lot in that question,
So,
but you mentioned several things that I think tie into where I want to go next. Anyway, you talked about, and this is me paraphrasing you, but you're talking about risk management, you're talking about change management, and you're talking about training, right? I think those are the three things that I took away from what you just said there, and I think as an organization looks to go forward, right, and as you look to align OT, IT better, the culture and resistance to change is a big part, right? And that's the risk management component of this, right? Nobody wants to be the person that shuts down an assembly line for 3 days and costs the company $3 million, right? Nobody wants to be that person to do that. So that's the risk management kind of thing. But the second part of that is the training and change management component to that, right? So, as you have worked with customers and clients of yours, when it comes to training and upskilling employees, and I think most importantly, this is kind of the risk management kind of component to this, in my mind, is getting the buy-in from both sides of the organization to make this work. What strategies do you guys recommend? What strategies have you seen work best, to get those kind of things, to get that kind of change process happening?
yeah. Um, there's one thing that comes in mind, Brian, that I see being successful or could be used by manufacturers to really get to solve that cultural problem, right? Because at the end of the day, like I said before, I think it's not about technology only; it's about culture.
Yeah.
And I honestly, it may sound very, very simple what I'm about to say, Brian, but I think the first thing is to spend a day in a life in each other's organization.
Hmm. Yeah.
You want to really upskill and you want to train yourself, you need to understand what the other guy is doing, right? And get your IT folks out on the factory floor to understand why I don't know, a 30-second delay in response time could shut down a line, right?
Hmm.
Or maybe you could send your OT guys to see how, let's say, data analytics can predict the equipment failures they've been fighting for years. And so when both sides start understanding each other's challenges, I think the collaborations become more natural, you know. And I'm actually speaking of experience myself. Um, when I got into the world of manufacturing and supporting the IT OT space, I mean, I don't pretend to be an OT person at all. I am not. I have actually an IT background. But when I started visiting factories, I put myself into their shoes.
Hmm.
And that completely convinced me to think about supporting OT differently. And I'm saying this being part of an organization that is actually partnering with my customers, right? But imagine they're in the same house. The benefit of like just having to spend time in what each other is doing is actually going to help, because after that upskilling, cross training will exponentially get adopted more easily, right? The buy-in the end is about connecting the people and their cultures, Brian.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds so simple, right? And most organizations don't do this. I mean, some out there certainly do cross training and whatnot, but I think generally speaking, you'll get to a better solution if you understand all the issues of the problem instead of just sitting and saying, I'm just going to solve for X. And then solving for X creates Y and Z problems, right? Like,
Mhm.
so if I can actually get down there and see what is causing X, then maybe I can create a solution for X without creating a problem at Y or problem Z, right? And I think that's what you're in essence saying, right? Is so understand what each side is doing so you can better incorporate what they would like to do and build a solution that actually works
Yeah,
for
absolutely,
everybody.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I think there's another aspect in my mind anyway, thinking about this. We deal with this in IT all the time, right? And that's cyber attacks. A
Mhm.
big thing. Supply chain has been a big topic of a big target, I should say, of cyber attacks this year. Um, I can see the OT side, right? Thinking it's like, well, why do I want to connect to more systems? That just increases my vulnerability to cyber attacks, right? So, can you talk about cybersecurity in terms of OT and IT and how it's addressed? Is there legitimate concerns on an OT side if they're connecting into more systems?
This is a very, very critical question and topic in the space, right? So you're absolutely spot on, Brian, in the fact that you know, I'd say we know that manufacturing is the number one victim of cyber extortion. And it's actually growing every year. I think it's been the third or fourth year in a row. Last year was, if I recall the number, 25% more. And you know what? Actually, 50% of those cyber attacks that are targeting OT systems right now, they are striking US companies. And by the way, if I can take just the opportunity to invite our listeners to look into our Orange Cyber Defense Security Navigator report, there's a lot of very, very well detailed information in there that support those numbers. But you know what, Brian? What's interesting about IT and OT, speaking different languages, is that security is one of those universal words, right? That should actually mean the same thing everywhere, but it does not, right? When IT talks about security, they're worried about hackers stealing data or IP, right? Their nightmare is, I would say, data breach, right? But when OT talks about security, they actually mean safety, right? But one thing that brings them together is that they're worried about cyber attacks causing explosions, poisoning products, or hurting people, right? And so the scary part of all of that is that the industrial digitalization, to your point, right, which is driven by Industry 4.0, that has completely changed the threat landscape, right? As you connect more and more of those, devices into the OT environment. But when you do that, you actually connect those two words together. So you connect those two nightmares together because one attack through IT can become an attack to the OT world, right? And so it naturally brings IT and OT together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, and it has to be, even if they're reluctant to work together, the idea that, I'm making this connection, so now I'm possibly vulnerable, would suggest to me that even if you're not thrilled about the idea of connecting and sharing, making this collaboration more cohesive, you need to be, right? And you need to say, well, you know what? I may not like this, but I have to do this because this is really important. And I can't have this shutdown. So in some ways, I mean, you talked earlier about, like sharing the, you know, exploring the other people's jobs and IT going into OT, et cetera. But this is a way to force that to happen too,
Absolutely,
in many
because
ways. Yeah.
75%, yeah, exactly. I mean, 75% of the OT attacks begin as IT breaches.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Do you have, can you share an example of what you're talking about there, maybe?
Yeah, I can share an example. We have this client that kind of had a sort of a routine phishing attack on their corporate email system. And the hacker used those stolen IT credentials to move into the IT network that is supporting the OT environment, right? Of a couple of factories.
Yeah.
And what they did is that they deployed, those attackers have deployed ransomware that encrypted the HMI systems that were controlling the production lines, right? So what basically started as just like somebody, clicking on a bad email link, I would say, uh, resulted into shutting down the manufacturing plant for over a week. I think multiple manufacturing plants actually, as a matter of fact. And that cost millions of dollars in lost production, right? And obviously customer penalties. So that's one example. And I have another one that just came across my mind right now is a client that had like a virtual LAN issue on the network switches, right? It sounds super simple, but actually it's not. That single issue broadcasted through their entire production line. So it's just like a VLAN network issue, huh? And that shut down a manufacturing environment for about a week also, right? So I'll let you imagine the financial impact as well here.
Yeah.
So, but that's the new reality, right? So IT security breaches don't just steal data anymore. They actually can stop factories from making product. And so, like I said before, the attack vector is through IT, but the business impact is actually pure OT.
Yeah. Yeah, we've moved way beyond the prince scam, right? Whether you get the email from the prince who has the money, if you just send him your
Yeah.
bank account information. But yeah, I mean, cybersecurity has become such a huge issue for businesses of all types, and supply chain in general and manufacturing specifically, as you mentioned, have just become such targets for this. Um, that it's really important that your cybersecurity is up to snuff and you doing the things. And as you connect more systems, both internally and externally, right? Because many companies have thousands of suppliers, and any one of those can be a cybersecurity issue for many of them. It's such an important part of your operations to make sure you're locked down as best as you can be. Want to shift a little bit of the conversation. We talked a lot about some of the things here in OT and IT and getting them together, but I want to shift to more practical. What do we do now? Kind of approach, right? So let's start with from your perspective. When we talk about best practices to get OT and IT teams together, and executives to get everybody speaking the same language on board with each other, what are some of the best practices that you see to help get that process started?
Yeah. So we just talked about cybersecurity being kind of a common ground
Mhm.
for everyone. I think that's one key thing. Secure your industrial infrastructure is the number one thing to do, right? As a best practice, obviously. Um, and that's what one of the best moves I've seen is really getting your CISO to become kind of the translator between these worlds, right? Super important. Think of the CISOs as a sort of a Google Translate for IT and OT. they have no other choice than speaking both languages because of what we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
But here's what I'm really seeing working with my clients. I mean, there's a lot of best practice, but I just want to focus maybe on one or two, right? I think um, building cross-functional teams that eliminate the silos is a really good way to proceed in getting those teams together, right? You literally put OT people and IT people on the same team and working towards the same goal. I know we talked about training, upskilling, and how you can spend a day in the life of each other, but here, like if you build the team to bring them together, measured by the same KPIs, you actually accelerate the convergence or the bridge between the two worlds, right? So because when they're solving problems together, they start understanding each other's constraints and they kind of start appreciating each other's expertise and they start creating some shared accountability, right? Because at the end of the day, when you get everyone to speak the same language, you know, like I said, it's not really just about a technology problem. It's a people's problem, right?
Mhm.
So if your teams do not trust each other and work together, things will fall apart. You mentioned like the snow, the hey, if you resolve a problem X, it's not it's you may create a problem Y, but actually if you resolve that problem A, you may not create that problem B. So we really kind of in this thing, right? So you cannot solve the IT OT conversions with technology alone. It's really about connecting people, building relationships, and creating shared ownership for the good of the organization. Now, one very important thing, you have to have leadership buy-in in this, right? It's absolutely critical for this to work, and I'm not only talking about executives just saying yes, let's do industrial digitalization. I mean, leaders, we need leaders that actively champion a unified vision, right? Where IT and OT succeed or actually fail together. And so when executives set clear goals that matter to both sides, whether it's from a OT perspective, which is reducing unplanned downtime, improving product quality, or even like strengthening safety, when you bring like the CEO or from an IT perspective, when you talk about data and you talk about innovation and you talk about technology, when you bring the CEO, the CIO, and the plant directors together and stand up and say, oh, you know what? Now moving forward, we are going to measure all teams on the same operational outcomes. That changes everything.
Yeah.
IT and OT will not be pointing fingers at each other anymore, right? Because they will have, the same scorecards, right? They become partners to work together towards the same objectives. Does that make sense, Brian?
Great points about leadership there and getting involved and whatnot. Want to ask you about others though, and some other things in the space, and specifically some specific industries, if you will. Aviation industry, automotive industries, as I understand it, they're much farther ahead on this journey of connecting OT and IT. Can you kind of talk a little bit about like leading industries such as those, what they do well, and what lessons that the lagging industries that are not farther along in this journey can take from that, and how they can get themselves further along in this journey?
Yeah, you're spot on with automotive and aerospace and defense. I mean, and actually even pharmaceutical, right? They are definitely leading the way. And what I've seen being sort of a common pattern is what people say life and death compliance.
Hmm.
Because those three verticals, like they all operate under very strict regulations where non-compliance can actually kill people, right? So FDA, drug manufacturing standards, aviation would be FAA safety requirements, right? Obviously you have the automotive crash standards, right?
Yeah.
They're not suggestions; they are actually legal mandates, and you have a lot of penalties and consequences for that, right? So I think with regulatory compliance, I think the industrial digitalizations become sort of a survival tool. It's not a nice to have anymore. And I always think like when I'm thinking about this topic, I'm always thinking about quality traceability, for example, right? Because you could think, for example, a car that has an accident, and this is due to a defective part, right? Well, the automotive vendors, they have to trace the product, right, from the raw material, I would say, through the final delivery, and that requires sophisticated tracking systems that only you can do with really digitized technologies and infrastructure into your environment, right? So I'd say that, oftentimes we think as regulation as a compliance burden, but it's often accelerating or justifying the industrial transformation when you think about it. So, um, we just talked about traceability, but food safety is another one, environmental reporting, and so on. So maybe enterprise needs to kind of use them as drivers to justify investments that would enable kind of broader adoption of the technology, right? And ultimately bring IT and OT together, right?
Yeah. So part of that is understanding your own organization too, right? And specifically your digital maturity level as where you are. So building on that, if you're looking, hey, how we need to advance, and we're going to use this as our driver to do this. Can you talk about how companies can self-evaluate themselves, right? And understand where they are digitally at this point, what maturity level they're at, so that they know where they stand in the journey and where they need to get to.
That's a super great. I mean, that's a great question. Very important here, I think, because essentially you cannot really improve what you cannot measure, right?
Yeah.
So we like to say internally here at Orange, assessments are the core foundation where success starts. And the first thing we tell our customers is to really start with a baseline assessment, right? You have to start by mapping what is your current state across a few key dimensions, I'd say, right? So first, technology, right? The technology landscape. Understand how does your baseline from that perspective look like? Deep dive on it. One thing we see a lot is, for example, a lack of visibility, um, a lack of ability to identify what's connected on your OT environment. So there is a lot of links with the cyber risks, the cyber security risks assessment, right? That allow to inspect the traffic that you have in your facilities and kind of uncover what devices are connected to it. So it's a way to say, okay, I don't know what I have. I'm not sure. Let me just assess with some of those tools that help me inspect and detect, and then identify obviously what would be, the next actions for me to do when I'm finished with doing that first, right?
Yeah.
So that's really technology centric. I think there's also a skills inventory, Brian, to be done. I know it sounds like a little bit weird, but it's really important that we just, figure out who has certifications, who does not, who has that knowledge, who does not, right? I think enterprises needs to really understand where is the critical knowledge gap, right? And are the IT folks comfortable on the factory floor, right? When they need to support the factory floor, are the OT people understanding like the cybersecurity principles, right? So it really goes back to kind of what we were a little bit talking about earlier, upskilling, training, and so on, right? So it really inventory of the skills.
Yeah.
And then I think the last one that comes in my mind is um, what what's your maturity in terms of how IT and OT actually interact, right? Are they collaborating or competing? What's the structure of governance? Do they have unified KPIs? I don't know. Do they, or how are they measured, right? Because that cultural assessment is often revealing kind of, more than just like technology, right? Like I said
Yeah.
before, right? So So I think it's important when you have done all those kind of three pillars to benchmark yourself after that with the industry standards, right? There's a lot of things out there, established maturity models, industry 4.0 readiness assessments, digital maturity frameworks. There's a lot out there, guys. But those are going to help you understand where you kind of feel and where you kind of fall on the spectrum of that I would say operational experience maturity, right?
Yeah,
Are we still manual, or are we still a little bit, or are we becoming a little bit more smart manufacturing, right? So don't compare to you can't really compare yourself to automotive or like even aerospace and defense. um, a lot of those verticals are a little bit advanced, but especially if you're in food manufacturing, you can't really do that comparison, you know what I mean? So you have to kind of keep like an honest assessment of yourself.
yeah. I want to get one final question in. I think this is a question that kind of wraps up everything you've kind of talked about today, but we've not really addressed it specifically per se, and that is on technologies out there today. There are a lot of technologies, both existing technologies like 5G, private 5G, edge computing we hear a lot about, AI obviously, is changing, and these technologies are changing and changing rapidly. So if you can kind of put on your hat at the moment as the thinker here, right, if you will, are there any technologies you see making the biggest impact for an OT IT integration, like either today or in the near future? I mean, what stands out to you as the technologies that are most transformative in this space?
Yeah. So Global Data actually conducted a survey of 100 IT and OT decision makers from manufacturing companies globally. And what you can see from that report is that actually the industrial digitalization is very well underway, right? So
Yeah,
clearly
yeah,
companies are already aware of the value of technologies and how that's going to help them into the industrial transformation. And they're actually willing to invest into those new technologies. As a matter of fact, and maybe I'm going to sound redundant, the top one is actually OT cybersecurity. So
okay,
that's
yeah,
really it's funny because we're coming back to that. That's normal. It's what brings them together is the number one concern for any organization, right? And obviously you have AI, you have edge computing, you have private 5G, you have a lot of things, right? Maybe I can spend a little bit more time on AI, right? As a way to kind of wrap this up a little bit.
yeah,
So AI exists in some fashion, right, into the manufacturing environment, and we hear about obviously predictive maintenance, monitoring, right? Those things are computer vision, right? To really detect the defects of a product, for example, right, or just like to monitor that your operator is wearing PPE equipment. So but when it comes to AI, we kind of have to talk a little bit about Gen AI because it's a trend, right? And Gen AI is a subset of AI, right? So how does Gen AI, how is it going to impact the manufacturing environment, right? And I think a lot of manufacturers are asking themselves that question, right? So even though cybersecurity kind of remains the number one concern, well, I think Gen AI is coming up
yeah,
very, very close, right? And at least it's creating kind of its own compelling case, right? And so, but to do AI and Gen AI in general, you have to have the right data, right? There's no good AI without the right data, right? So you cannot do if your operational data is actually trapped in silos in your OT systems, and they don't talk to IT systems, how are you going to be able to monetize that, right? How are you going to be able to use that? It's kind of complicated. So to be truly effective, and I think it's very important here, like the tools that operators and IT may be using in the future or already using, right, have to kind of connect IT and OT, right? You cannot optimize production schedules if your AI only sees business systems, right? But not real-time equipment performance.
yeah.
So again, cybersecurity is driving the kind of, okay, we must integrate together conversation, I think Gen AI is gonna drive we should definitely integrate rapidly kind of conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because it's gonna create that integration opportunity that complements the security thing, right? So, and I think companies are realizing this today. When we talk to them, they really need a unified data architecture, right? Not only to protect themselves, but to also unlock competitive advantage. And to me, that's gonna push ITLT to work even more together, at least in my
Yep.
opinion.
Yep. Well, thank you. Thank you. You appreciate you sharing your opinion, your insights here. I mean, you're the expert in the space, so I greatly appreciate it. We are out of time, but I just want to say, like, I think my takeaway from the whole conversation today is that, the OT IT integration. I think we all think about it's about technology, right? But it's about the people, it's about the culture, and it's about ensuring that you have trust across your organization, right? To make this work. 'Cause and we could talk about cybersecurity, we can talk about AI and other technologies, and the need to be resilient and some of this other stuff. But it all ties together. It's not just about the technology; it's about the people and the culture that you have as well. So, Ferris, as a final thought, again, thank you. If people want to get in touch with you guys, to learn more about this subject or possibly consult with you guys, is there a really good way for them to do that?
Yeah, please feel free to reach out to us. We also have a website online, orange-business.com, where you can actually go in there and look at our portfolio of services that we provide to our customers. We're very happy to help. We've been helping customers already. We can share the experiences that we have. Happy to do so anytime. Please feel free to reach out.
Great. Uh, Thank you, Ferris. We are out of time. I do want to thank my guest today, Ferris Sakka of Orange Business, and of course, all of you who took time out of your day to listen to us today. We greatly appreciate it. New episodes of Talking Supply Chain come out on Thursdays. You can find them on scmr.com or wherever you get your podcasts. So be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, this is Brian Straight, and you've been listening to Talking Supply Chain. Talking Supply Chain is produced by Supply Chain Management Review and Peerless Media. You can find it on scmr.com, supplychain247.com, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or wherever you find your podcasts. For more information on this topic or to sign up for our weekly newsletter, a print or a digital subscription to our publication, visit scmr.com. We hope you will join us for our next episode. For Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Brian Straight, and thank you for listening.